Well, you have a very interesting theory, which I'll call the Starbucks theory.
I mean, it's not mine per se, but yeah, I've been talking to a lot of my peers and a lot of my colleagues about the way jazz is being presented to the general public these days, which I think is kind of dangerous and plays into that same thing. But taking Starbucks as an example, since there's one on every corner. If you're going into any Starbucks, the music that you're hearing piped in over the PA system is no longer music, a company specifically designed to, compose background music. But you'll go in and you'll hear Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong and even John Coltrane as background music. And so one of the things that I run into a whole lot with my students and with the general public is that people perceive that jazz as background music. I'll play a piece by, say, John Coltrane in class and ask for student responses, and the overwhelming response that I get from them is that that sounds like, a fancy restaurant, or that sounds like, background music, which to us, we hear that and think of it as this, pinnacle of Western art for some of us. This is the most intense, expressive experience ever, but we kind of have to examine how it's being presented if other people can hear those same sounds and view them as simply musical wallpaper or simply background music. And I think that's a very dangerous thing, because presenting that music as background music devalues it. And I think that's something we need to combat. If we're going to try and present this music as this cultural icon, we kind of need to watch out that it isn't being presented as something that people are going to associate with buying coffee, which I think is a serious problem. Ella Fitzgerald is not a marketing tool; she's Ella Fitzgerald.
You also had a theory on Lincoln Center.
Lincoln Center, yeah, Lincoln Center, I think, is doing a bit of good and a bit of bad. Their major goal, and what Wynton Marsalis talks about a whole lot, is that jazz has finally achieved cultural equality with classical music. They now have their own concert halls, their own venues, they've been institutionalized, which was their goal all along. But I'm not sure that that was such a good thing. I think that classical music, especially these days, has a lot of problems. Just in the New York Times over the last 3 or 4 weeks, there have been multiple articles about how all the big 5 symphony orchestras, Chicago, Philadelphia, Cleveland, New York, Boston, are almost all running with deficits. They can't get people to come to the concerts. It also, the association that gets evoked with a lot of classical music is that it's culturally elitist, that these tickets cost $60, $70 a ticket unless you're a senior citizen or a student. And that kind of makes it impossible for the general public to access live performances of Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, whoever. Which limits the audience, which now they're feeling the repercussions from, because they don't have the audiences anymore, because they're not presenting themselves as something that's accessible. And I think that Lincoln Center runs the risk of doing the same thing to jazz, where we're taking this music and saying that it's this culturally valuable thing, but then removing it from the culture, removing it from the public. Tickets to go and see the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra are, running $50 plus. The average citizen can't afford to see that. So it's all well and good to say that this is culturally important music, but it doesn't do it it's not helpful in any way to then make it culturally elitist and then put another barrier between the people and the music.
I think that's such an interesting theory, because we think of this as such a great thing, and yet there's another aspect to it that we're forgetting about.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good thing, but I think it needs to be careful. I mean, it's good that it's getting as much recognition culturally as classical music does. It is just as important, it's just as expressive.